Have you ever wondered if you could somehow stack the genetic deck? Like if you could actually influence whether you'll be buying tiny pink dresses or little blue overalls? Well, from ancient superstitions, like literally tucking a hatchet under your bed, to modern internet forums telling you to eat way more bananas or wear pink for a week, the desire to choose a baby's sex is kinda as old as humanity itself. So welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to explore the fascinating, sometimes totally contradictory, and honestly often misunderstood world of baby making. We're going to cut through all that noise to find out if you can truly play genetics when you're trying to conceive.
Okay, let's dive into this. If you do even a quick search online, you are immediately hit with an absolute avalanche of rumors, old wives' tales, and these supposedly guaranteed methods. But what's the actual scientific reality here? Can you really choose the sex of your baby? Well, the short answer is yes, but absolutely not in the way those internet forums claim. It requires some really heavy medical intervention. And outside of that, those DIY tricks you read about mostly belong straight in the realm of fiction.
Here is exactly how we're going to break this down today. 1. Boy or girl. 2. Unproven DIY methods. 3. Rapid-fire myths. 4. Medical methods that work. And 5. Boosting your fertility. Section 1. Boy or girl. Biological sex versus gender identity. You know, the desire to have a boy or a girl can be incredibly personal for people. Maybe it's to balance out a family, or maybe it's tied to deep cultural expectations. But before we get into the how-to methods, we really need to establish a super clear distinction. When we talk about choosing a baby's sex in this explainer, we are talking strictly about biological sex. That is determined right at conception by chromosomes, male being XY or female being XX. But biological sex is an entirely different thing from gender identity. Gender identity is how a person actually experiences, expresses, and identifies themselves later on in life. So it's absolutely crucial to remember that even if biological sex is somehow selected before birth, it definitely does not dictate how that child will feel or identify in the future. And honestly, because we're talking about manipulating human biology here, this brings up some major medical and legal discussions. There's an ongoing, very real debate about gender bias. Because of that, a lot of experts argue that medical sex selection should be strictly reserved for preventing serious sex-linked genetic diseases, not just because a parent happens to prefer one sex over the other. And the laws around the world actually reflect this divide too. In places like the UK, Canada, and much of Europe, non-medical sex selection is completely prohibited. Meanwhile, in countries like the US and Mexico, it's currently permitted. Section 2. Unproven DIY methods. The timing debate. All right, let's leave the laboratory for a minute and look at the natural or DIY methods. The most famous of these hinge on one specific idea: perfectly timing intercourse with ovulation to supposedly tip the scales. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the glaring contradiction between the two most famous methods out there. We've got the Shettles method and the Whelan method. Both of them claim to have cracked the code of timing, yet they give almost entirely opposite instructions. It's honestly a perfect example of why this whole space is so incredibly confusing for couples trying to conceive. Let's break down the actual mechanics here. So the Shettles method claims that Y-bearing sperm, the ones that lead to a boy, swim way faster but they die sooner. Therefore, if you want a boy, Shettles says you've got to have sex as close to ovulation as possible. For a girl, Shettles says 2 to 3 days before ovulation, assuming those slower, longer-living, X-bearing sperm will stick around to fertilize the egg. But then, we have the Whelan method. Whelan completely ignores the speed of the sperm and instead relies on the shifting biochemical environment of a woman's body. Whelan says for a boy, you should have sex 4 to 6 days before ovulation. Notice how that completely contradicts Shettles? Crazy, right? So who's right? Well, actually neither of them. A major study conducted back in 1995 looked at exactly this and found absolutely no reliable link between the timing of intercourse and a baby's sex. In fact, trying to strictly follow these super restrictive schedules, like totally abstaining from sex right before ovulation, might actually hurt your overall chances of getting pregnant in the first place, because sperm survival actually decreases the longer it waits. And it definitely doesn't stop at just timing. There's an entire market out there of commercial at-home kits that claim you can sway your odds just by altering your body's pH levels. They'll sell you test strips, special diets, random supplements, the whole shebang. Let's be crystal clear here. There's a severe lack of solid scientific proof for these kits. The evidence around pH levels altering sperm success is incredibly limited. But more importantly, using unprescribed products or douching to change your natural pH can actually be really harmful. You're risking serious vaginal infections or severe irritation. Section 3. Rapid-fire myths. Fact
versus fiction.
Okay, we're gonna speed things up right now, because misinformation doesn't just confuse people, it adds so much unnecessary pressure and anxiety to what should really be an exciting time. Ready? Let's clear up the fiction. Myth number 1, sex positions determine the sex. Fact, there is absolutely no conclusive evidence that your sexual position changes anything. Myth 2, your diet sways the odds. Fact, some studies suggest a highly debated very small link, like say, higher energy and breakfast cereal intake correlating slightly to having boys, but it is nowhere near deterministic. Myth 3, some families only produce boys because of genetics. Fact, while a father's gene variant might slightly influence the overall ratio of boys to daughters over a whole population, it does not determine the sex of any individual child. Myth 4, a woman's orgasm affects the baby's sex, which was a claim popularized by Shettles. Fact, there is zero proof of this. The big takeaway here? These fun little tricks don't change your odds, so seriously, take the pressure off yourselves.
Section 4. Medical methods that work. The real science. So, if the timing and the diets don't work, what actually does? Well, as we mentioned at the start, to truly choose your baby's sex, you have to leave those DIY tricks behind and step straight into a medical laboratory. And this brilliantly illustrates the reality of sex selection today. Preimplantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD. This is a complex procedure done alongside in vitro fertilization, or IVF. Essentially, eggs are collected, they're fertilized in a lab to create embryos, and then, before they are ever transferred to the uterus, scientists test the embryos to look directly at their sex chromosomes. You can literally see exactly which embryos are XX and which ones are XY. Because scientists are looking straight at the actual genetic code, PGD is nearly 100% accurate. But, and this is a massive but, it comes with huge caveats. It is highly invasive, it's incredibly expensive, and like we discussed earlier, in many parts of the world it is strictly regulated and only offered to families trying to prevent severe genetic conditions, not for those who simply want to pick a boy or a girl.
There is one other medical method that's worth a quick mention, and that's sperm sorting. This is where a machine literally separates X-bearing and Y-bearing sperm in a lab before fertility treatments even happen. While it can shift the odds, it's far less reliable than PGD. Plus, it's largely unavailable to the general public anyway. To put that into perspective, it was actually completely discontinued in the United States back in 2012, and it's only accessible in a handful of countries today.
Section 5. Boosting your fertility. Taking control.
Since you can't really choose the sex of your baby without complex IVF and genetic testing, let's pivot to what you absolutely can control. Let's talk about empowering yourself by boosting your overall fertility. Building a really healthy foundation for pregnancy starts long before conception, and it completely involves both partners. Maintaining a balanced diet, exercising moderately, limiting alcohol and smoking, those are absolute crucial first steps. It's also highly recommended to seek preconception counseling with your doctor, just to identify any underlying health risks. Crucially, you've got to manage your stress. High stress can literally disrupt the menstrual cycle, which throws off ovulation entirely. And finally, the absolute most powerful tool in your entire arsenal, tracking your cycles.
Why is tracking such a big deal? Well, get this, an egg only survives for 12 to 24 hours after it's released. That is an incredibly brief window of time. Your overall fertile window really just consists of the few days leading up to and including the day of ovulation. If you miss that window, there's no way around it. You have to wait for the next cycle.
So the crucial point is that you cannot rely on old textbook rules. We've all heard the day 14 rule, right? The idea that every woman ovulates exactly on day 14 of a 28-day cycle. Well, the data shows this is completely out of date. The average cycle is actually closer to 29 days, and the exact timing of ovulation is highly individual. If you just assume you ovulate on day 14, you might completely miss your actual fertile window.
Instead of just guessing, you can track it accurately. You can measure your basal body temperature every single morning to detect that slight temperature spike that happens right after ovulation. You can monitor changes in cervical mucus, which naturally becomes transparent and slippery around ovulation. You can use at-home urine tests to detect the hormone surge that triggers the egg's release. Or you can take a whole lot of the manual labor out of it by using FDA-cleared apps like Natural Cycles. Those use smart algorithms and your daily temperature data to mathematically predict and confirm your exact window.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground today. We've busted the internet myths, we've looked at the heavy medical reality of sex selection, and we've outlined the absolute best ways to actually get pregnant. The truth is, nature loves a surprise, and the sex of your baby is just one of life's truly great unscripted moments. But just because you can't pick the sex doesn't mean you're powerless. Not at all. You hold the tools to maximize your overall chances of a healthy conception. So with that in mind, since you can't pick the sex, how will you take charge of your fertility journey today?